like I said, I'm going to be covering a little bit of history of the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve that I'll just probably call the BCP from here on out, and the Balcones Canyonlands Conservation Plan, which basically established the BCP. I see some volunteers in this audience that could probably give this talk. They've been around for long enough. Gary, I'm looking at you in the back. And so anyway, we'll get, some of it's kind of dry and kind of boring. I'll skim through that really quickly and then show really cool pictures. And of course, any questions that anyone has at the end. So, you know, this is a current map of the current layout of the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve. You'll hear me say multiple times tonight that is still one of the largest urban preserves in the entire country. And it really was a landmark deal, an awesome adventure that we embarked on way back in the day. Currently, we're sitting at just over 33,000 acres, which is a little over 50 square miles. You know, if you look on Google Earth nowadays, the big blots of green that you see are likely part of the BCP. It's some of the only green spaces, large tracts of green spaces that you'll see out on the preserve. Now, many of you, I see, you're familiar with the BCP, and it is not one big tract of land. Often when we talk about the preserve, people think it's one location that they could go to and see. But in reality, it's a patchwork of preserve that's run by a huge number of partners, public and private partners. The main players in the game are, I'm with Travis County Natural Resources. We manage and own the purple, bluish purple color that you see on the map there. And then there's the city of Austin that manages the green. But then we have a lot of other partners, just like Wild Basin, that has this wonderful tract. Travis Audubon, that's got Baker Sanctuary, the yellow dot up there in the top, and then NRCS, and of course, the Lower Colorado River Authority, and I mean, there's tons of them. The Texas Cave Management Association, Sunset Valley, there's a bunch of other private landowners that have parts of the BCP. So I'm going to give a little bit of background here. This is kind of this, why is this spot so ecologically important, and why did we want to put a preserve here to start with? You know, we sit right on the edge of what's called the Balcones Canyonlands, or Balcones Escarpment, right on the edge of the Edwards Plateau there, that dotted line. And we're kind of this conflagration of all these different ecoregions, right? From the cross timbers and the Blackland Prairie, the Edwards Plateau, even the southern post oak savannas. They all come together in this place that's just incredibly ecologically. The number of both species diversity and species uniqueness here is pretty incredible, because we get species that come in from all over the Northeast, South, and West and live here. We're one of the highest diverse places in the world when it comes to the number of unique species that are found nowhere else in the world. And some of those species we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. The iconic Hamilton Pool Preserve, also part of the BCP, and not many people realize that, is a great example of what that Balcones fault line, that escarpment is, and where the two plates push up against one another and create these amazing rock formations. So currently, the preserve protects for one bird, used to be two birds, we'll touch on that a little bit, and 6 karst invertebrates. The first bird I want to talk about is this guy in the top left, the black-capped vireo. One of my favorite birds, was one of the first birds that I worked on in college for a summer, where we were banding and putting transmitters on them and doing all kinds of stuff. The bird was delisted. It was part of the preserve. It was endangered when the preserve was first established, that we'll talk about back in 1996. It was removed in 2018 because of its range is much broader than our other species. They found some other populations that they didn't know existed, and the federal government decided that they thought it'd be okay to take it off the endangered species list because of places like us and Fort Hood and other places that have these large tracts of land that manage for this species. So part of the reason why they removed it was the fact that it had so much protection under it. I could go either way. I wish it was still on the endangered species list. But at Travis County and on the BCP, we still manage for that bird as it's endangered. We manage habitat for it. It's a little bit different in its habitat requirements than the golden cheek. And we'll talk a little bit more about the research on those guys later. Of course, the golden cheek warbler, if you've been in Austin for more than 5 minutes, you should know what this bird is, okay? We like to say that every single one's a native Texan. They're all born here. They raise exclusively, right? Texans are proud of that, right? And so that's every single one of them is born right here in this pretty small Central Texas area. And then the other 6 are all cave invertebrates. They're troglobites. They spend their entire lives underground. They never come above caves. My favorite one is the tooth cave pseudoscorpion, the guy kind of center top. That little animal, he looks vicious, right? And he actually has venom in his claws, and they kill little things. He could fit on your pinky nail. Okay, he's really, really tiny, but he's my favorite critter out of all those. And they're all blind. They all have really long arms because they live in caves. They all have really long antennas. They're just crazy critters in general. But so the landscapes of the Canyonlands, you know, everyone who's been here, you just look outside, and that's the landscape of the Canyonlands, right? It's it's live oak and juniper woodlands, oak juniper woodlands mostly. But we have a lot of these really awesome hidden gems like Hamilton Pool. And this picture here is from a spot on Concordia that has a little piece of the BCP. You know, these awesome spring-fed creeks and pools that are all over the place. So this is the preserve currently, but a lot of people don't know why the preserve was formed. They know it's here, they know it's awesome and we protect us, but why was it formed and what is it, the main goal? There's another goal of the preserve, okay? We're gonna roll it all the way back to the 1970s. I'll tell you that I wasn't here in the 1970s, but in 1973, Nixon signed the Endangered Species Act. Okay, he also established the first Earth Day. That's what that picture is there on the right. The picture's just incredible to me because she's out there in high heels, dirt, you know, dirt's on a tarp. She's throwing a load of dirt on a tree. It's just incredible. But you know, and the Endangered Species Act was not the first federal law to protect any endangered species, but its scope was much wider and broader than anything that came before it, right? And I'm going to read this definition because it's kind of crazy. But the Endangered Species Act prohibits harm to species, including the alteration of habitat that results in any injury or death of a listed species by preventing any essential behavior such as breeding, foraging, or sheltering. Okay, so this is kind of what started the whole ball rolling. I'm going to take a step back here for a second and say something else was going on in the 1970s that was very pertinent to Wild Basin. It was an environmental group called Now or Never. Right? It was a 7-woman group that basically wanted to protect this land that is now Wild Basin. And they worked for years to protect this land. And eventually Travis County took up the cause. They purchased the land with grants from Texas Parks and Wildlife. And they finished assembling what is now Wild Basin back in 1976. And Wild Basin became Austin's first nature preserve. Then it was subsequently dedicated to the BCCP when it was formed in 1996. But it is Austin's oldest preserve, and I just thought we're kind of building the timeline here. So this is what's going on in the 70s. I had a really interesting conversation the other day with the folks over at Baker Sanctuary with Travis Audubon. Nicole Netherton was at one of the meetings that I was at, and she said that they started working on the Baker Sanctuary Preserve in 1954. So they were seeing all the way back then that we had to protect this stuff because it was so important, you know. So that was in the 70s. And then, over the first 10 years of the Endangered Species Act, there was a whole lot of pushback. It was seen as too protective, too stringent. It really stopped. There was a ton of pushback, both from developers, private landowners, all kinds of stuff, because they thought it was hurting our economy. They thought it was taking away jobs. There was a couple of really high-profile infrastructure projects that were completely canceled or destroyed because of an endangered plant species that they found in Maine. And so, in 1982, they decided, okay, we're going to amend this with what we call the 10A Amendment, and it's going to allow people to be able to go to the federal government and say, I want to get an incidental take permit that'll let them basically destroy habitat in order to build what they need to build. In exchange for this permit, though, they're required to create a habitat conservation plan with assured funding and research goals and all kinds of things that made it pretty difficult for certain landowners to get it. The purpose of these HCPs are to kind of relieve the burden on the private landowners and the developers, and while also facilitating the development as well as the habitat restoration and management of these properties. So, we had the Endangered Species Act come in, and then 10 years later, they amended it to make these HCPs come into play. And for the first many years of the HCP program, no one used them. I think for the first it's something like the first 10 years of the program, they only had a handful of HCPs, one in California, one in Florida, and one in Texas. But we're going to fast forward to the 1980s, and things started to happen really, really quickly. There were 8 species just in Travis County that were listed in a 4-year period, starting with the black-cap vireo, and then all the other ones that we still permit for. And what else happened during the late 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s here in Austin? Our population was exploding, right? We were having tremendous growth. And we went from something like this to something like this in 100 years. And that's just striking to me. This is a pretty cool set of pictures, but that's a 100-year difference. And so, we had all these species coming endangered, we had all this tremendous growth, and with it came a lot of environmental pressure. In the late 1980s, things really came to a head. There was a big protest here. This one's for Steiner Ranch, and they were specifically protesting black-cap vireo. They were saying, we got to save the black-cap vireo for Steiner Ranch. This is important when we talk about research a little bit later. But the environmentalist groups really started to ramp up in the 1980s. And in 1988, there was a group called Earth First. Okay? They started having, this is called a cave-in. This individual right here in the picture, Mark Sanders, he still works for the Austin Water Wildlands as a biologist for the BCCP to this day. And here he is in 1988 living in a cave to protest. There were basically, in the news article, it's really interesting. They talk about the rural area where the roads only have numbers, where 620 and 2222 come together, the rural part of Austin. That's where this was taken, and he had, it's a shame that Barbara's not here tonight because I didn't tell her that I put this in here, but everyone ought to recognize this person right here. So this is Barbara Duggarby, who's now the executive director of Wild Basin. So this is 1988, the same cave protests that Mark was at. Barbara was involved with those. And I didn't tell her I was putting this picture in there. I just thought I'd throw it in there, and I thought to see, where it would go. But essentially, all this environmental pressure and things kind of came to a head, and they decided, we have to figure out something. We have to be able to facilitate all this tremendous growth and development that we have while protecting our endangered species. How are we going to do it? So they put together this coalition, or this committee, essentially, that had everybody at the table. Business owners, government, the environmentalist groups, concerned citizens, scientists, everybody came together. They're like, we've got to figure out how to do this. And, I make it sound really easy. But they started this in 1988, and the preserve was dedicated in 1996. So it was a really long period of time. And during this time, when they tried to figure out how to do this, development really ground to a halt in Austin. Things were really hard to get done. The federal government wasn't giving permits. There was a lot of backlash. And many people have forgotten that the main issue that drove what is the Balcones Canyonlands Conservation Plan, that's part of this, was the extremely long waits at U.S. Fish and Wildlife to get a permit to do anything. As well as the uncertainty. There was kind of we'll permit that, but we're not going to do that. Well, why? We don't want to, right? So there had to be a way to facilitate all this. And so the team came together, and they're like, what we need to do? We need to protect 125,000 acres in Travis County for this to work. And if you remember at the very beginning when I showed the picture, we're at 33,000 right now, and you saw how much of that map was covered up. 125,000 acres, is there even that available in Travis County? They weren't sure at the time. So this compromise that we talk about, right, that trying to benefit that development with the protection of the species, they came back and said, okay, we'll do this. We want to protect 75,000 acres, but we're going to do it in two ways. We want the BCCP group to protect a little over 30,000 acres. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is going to start another preserve that's a little over 45,000 acres in goal called the National Wildlife Refuge that I know several of you volunteer at and you're at all the time, right? But the main goal is the same thing, to protect habitat for these endangered species while allowing for this development to continue. So in 1996, they busted all their heads together and they signed this document, the Balcones Canyonlands Conservation Plan. Basically, that tasked the city of Austin and Travis County with amassing this 30,000 acres plus and protecting 35 named caves in order to be able to permit and mitigate for development. So this is the part of the preserve that people don't realize that we're here. These lands are lands that are set aside to then mitigate for other development going on. Okay? So that Steiner Ranch that they protested, they're part of the BCP and they donated a bunch of land that went to mitigation bank so that they could build the rest of that neighborhood. So BCCP was a landmark deal. It was the first ever multi-species regional habitat conservation plan in the entire country. It served as a model all across the nation. And you'll hear me talk about this later. Is it perfect? It's not perfect. But it was an awesome compromise, and it really was, it did well what it wanted to do, which was facilitate this development while making things happen. So this is Nancy Kaufman signing that. She was the head of Fish and Wildlife Service, and there were a bunch of other, all the bigwigs were there. And this next picture, I just put it in because it's just incredible to me. But this is the original plan. This is what they came up with the BCCP. I haven't read it, but I heard these documents are still downtown if you want to go and look at it, right? But the plan allowed developers to come to us and say, we want to get a permit to develop this land. We want to be a part of the HCP. It's completely voluntary. They can still go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife if they want to, but they have to wait for those long wait times and uncertainty. But they're allowed to get these permits and build what they want to build. And it was shown as a win-win for developers, and it was kind of that, it's not development or the environment, it was kind of both. And that's what really trying to drive home here is that was, what we aimed to do, and it was fairly successful at it. So this is the permit area. Anywhere you're in this dark blue area, if someone wants to build something, they can elect to participate in the BCCP rather, where they can come to us and get a permit. And they pay a fee based on habitat that's there. And then the outlined area is the proposed area of the preserve, and then the proposed area of the National Wildlife Refuge. And it's interesting because if you see, this was the same map that they developed in 1996. So this is the preserve where we want the reserve to be. And if you overlay those two maps today, it matches up almost perfectly. There were places that we couldn't get that are now developed, and there were places that we got that weren't on this map. But for the most part, they really do line up, and it's pretty cool. And they decided to do it two ways. Travis County take permits to anyone that wants to do commercial or residential development. They all come through the county. The city manages our big infrastructure projects, roads, telephone poles, all those kinds of things. And like we said, it's not perfect, but so far today, there's been more than 1,200 private landowners and developers that have gotten BCCP permits. And it's resulted in the development of over 57,000 acres in Travis County and 400 public infrastructure projects. So it really did what it needed to do. So what's the future of this BCCP program, right? And we mentioned in 1996, we signed that permit. It was a 30-year permit. So if you do your math, 1996, 2026, well, May 2nd, our permit expires. What's going to happen, okay? As of like 2 weeks ago, I think, we got the signatures on the dotted line, and we have applied for a 15-year extension of the permit. And folks go, why 15 years? Well, what we did is we did a bunch of analysis, and we determined that, we're using our mitigation credits, so those acreage that we've accumulated, we're using about a third of that every 15 years. We've mitigated for about 2/3 of what we own, the little over 30,000 acres of the preserve. And they think that in 15 years, we'll probably have used all of that up and will be completely mitigated for, so there won't be a reason to have that BCCP part of it anymore. So we put in for this 15-year extension, thought we can continue, and we've been told by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife that this process is pretty easy, right? We're not making any huge sweeping changes to the plan. We're just updating language. We're removing some stuff that was never used, and we're going to proceed forward. There was some talk about whether we should add other species, the bumblebee, the monarch butterfly, things like that. But we're not adding it to this plan if we needed to, and then we could just try to go and get another HCP. It's kind of the thoughts on that. But no matter what, if they were to come back and say, you know what, we're not going to give you a new permit, you don't need it. No matter what, the lands that are under the BCP protection will be protected forever. It's all owned by the city, county, or these private governments in perpetuity, and it will never be developed, no matter what. All that we would lose is this expedited permitting process, essentially, and the way for developers to go through. So, also really exciting on the future is the BCP Visitor Center. It's taken us 30 years, but we're building a BCP Visitor Center. The county bought this building back in 2019. It sits off of 620 and Wilson Park Avenue, right across from Concordia University right there. Used to be SAS Technologies. It doesn't look like this at all. It's an ugly square concrete building right now. It doesn't look like this at all, but we bought it in 2019. We've developed, we've made the schematic design. We got approval from the Commissioner's Court. We've got fundings. Now we're going out to build it. So in 4 years, that's what we're estimating, 4 years, right? County moves at the speed of snail. We're going to hope that this building opens, and it's going to be amazing. My office is on the second floor right there in the corner. Right? And we have this living wall that's got all natural stone from the area that goes all the way out the entranceway, all native plant gardens. It's going to tell the story of those karst species, tell the story of these bird species. The entire bottom floor is going to be exhibit space, classroom space, things like that for visitors. 93 acres, completely open to the public, open hiking trails. There's a shelter cave on site that people will be able to see. It's going to be amazing. So this is the backside of that same building. You can see there's a 3-story observation deck where people will be able to go to. And this is a really unique location, and the reason why the county bought it is because it gets completely surrounded by preserve. So you're going to have an almost 360-degree view of the preserve from the top of that. And an amphitheater, small, like 100-person seating for programs and hikes and things like that. Rainwater collection systems that's going to be for all the native gardens. We're going for what's called a CITES Gold certification. So if you're a developer, everything that we use is going to be reused as much as possible. We're not going to use any landscaping water that's not collected on site, those kind of things. Yeah?
Where would you say that's located?
This is at 620 and Wilson Park Avenue, right across from Concordia. Yep, it's technically in the Grandview Hills neighborhood, if you know where that is. So, how am I doing on time? Am I rambling on? Okay, good.
Keep going, man.
Well, sometimes I fly through stuff, and sometimes I feel like I'm.
It's about 6:30.
Awesome. So and I'm happy to talk more about the visitor center. I'm super pumped about this because I lead outreach, education, volunteering. Like, this is going to be a big part of my gig going forward. And the fact that the county is going into a place where people can come and open to the public, because most of the preserve is closed. 95% of the preserve is closed to the public on the normal days. So we're really excited about this. But ongoing research. So I was sitting in the office the other day and I just yelled out to the biologist in the back. I was like, hey, I'm giving a presentation. I need to know what you guys are seeing right now. And anytime you ask a biologist that, I got pages of stuff. And I was like, whoa, guys, I wanted the bullet points, okay? But we continue to manage for the BCVI, which is the black cat vireo habitat, just like it was endangered. Right now, so far this year, they're monitoring about 28 black cat vireo nests, which is really high for us, right? We're on the kind of the southern end of their range, southern and eastern end of the range, and we don't have a ton of them. But they're monitoring these nests. We've seen others. A couple of the highlights is that the first ever was mapped at Pace Bend, a territory for these guys. We've never had one there before, and they got one this year. So Paul Fuchil, if you know him, he's been with the BCP since it was started in 1996. He came over from Hamilton Pool. He runs this program. He's really excited about it. And then one of the males that they banded last year on Grandview Hills was located this year on Steiner Ranch. And if you remember, when they were protesting about black cap vireos at Steiner Ranch, it's extremely rare for us to see a black cap on Steiner Ranch nowadays. And so for them to see this bird here, they think, okay, things might be working. These birds are kind of shifting over to this habitat. So they're very excited about that. On the golden cheek warbler side of things, it's one of my favorite photos ever. It was taken by a volunteer named Melody Lytle. She's a great photographer. But, the golden cheek warblers have started arriving in mid-March, and they had found the first nest on Vista Point this year on the 23rd of March, which is pretty early for those guys. So far, they've located over 30 nests, and they continue to follow a bunch of them. But what they're seeing like this year is kind of a little higher amount of nest failure than they normally see, and they're not sure why they're seeing that. It's too early to say. And they don't think it's BCP-wide. They think it might just be on our kind of extensive study plots, and it could, who knows, maybe it has affected the winter storm, or we really don't know. Maybe they got here too early and the food base wasn't there, right? But this next image is pretty neat. This is from last year's data. This is on Sam Hamilton and what we call Ribelin. So that's Vandergrift High School, this little building right down here. But this is kind of what our biologists do for the golden cheek warblers, is they go out and some of these are banded, some of them are not, and they go out and get points on them all season long, and then they come back through and they can map the territories for these individual male birds, and you can see how they kind of overlap in different areas. And they do these for many of our tracks every year and rotate them around, and I just think it's really cool to see that each one of these individual observations was where they saw one of these birds traveling out throughout the year, so it's pretty interesting. And then other research. One of the goals of the BCP is to be a research hub for just anyone and everyone that wants to do it. We could give a whole talk, and I think, in fact, Wild Basin did a whole talk on one of these on research that's just going on right here at Wild Basin. And so there's also many other things going on with canopy arthropods to study food source availability for golden cheek warblers. The banding keeps going on. There's a lot of research going on tawny crazy ants. Has anyone heard of those yet? Okay, it's a ridiculous ant that's invaded from South America. That the cool news about this, and our biologist Travis Clark that leads this up, basically there's what's called a microsporidian pathogen. It's this biological agent that has gotten into the ants in certain areas where they've affected these caves with the endangered species, but this microsporidian causes the ant to die. And in some areas, these populations have completely crashed and sunk back. And what they did is they've gone to a lab, and Ed LeBrun at UT has developed this stuff that they're kind of inoculating into these tawny crazy ant colonies to try to get them to collapse. And right now they're ongoing at McNeil Caves near McNeil High School and a bunch of other caves. And then they just recently found that these ants have invaded welded and no-rent caves, which are two other really big caves that have endangered species in them. And so we're hoping that these pathogens will be able to help that out. Also really exciting this year is they established a MAPS banding station, which is basically a way to band birds and monitor their productivity and their survivalship throughout the years. And we're doing this in areas before we do restoration projects. So like on our Medway project that you'll see me talk about, those of y'all that know Vireo Preserve right over here, Double J&T, where they've done a lot of the replanting on the berms and swells, we're just starting one of those projects. And they're going to do MAPS banding in these areas to see pre and post restoration how it affects the bird communities. So that's pretty neat. And then of course we continue monitoring for all those little karst bugs and all the things. And we don't know what the research is going to come out. We're partnering with Planet 2050 to do ecological climate change research. We're doing the berms and swells to build resiliency in our forest because of the unknown climate change days that are coming. Anyway, I'll keep going on that. But, to kind of wrap up, just to say that the BCP that we have built today, this thing on this map, is just an amazing phenomenon. To think about that there's a giant nature preserve in the middle of one of the fastest growing urban places in the entire country was awesome. And it's just created through the hard work and compromise. And it was seen as a win-win by many people. It's a fantastic example of how partners working together in the community can come together and support an impossible goal, seemingly impossible goal. So had it not been for the forethought and hard work of many people who had that dream, the BCP, who had the dream, as well as the people who continue today to work to maintain it, this all would have been developed by now. It's pretty much kind of inevitable. And the fact that you could see the preserve anywhere from Google Maps because everything around it has been developed is pretty incredible. But if it had been developed, I like to think about if it had been, not only would traffic be way worse, I don't know if it was worse for any of y'all coming in, but kids and adults alike wouldn't have the opportunities to come and learn at places like Wild Basin and West Cave and Hamilton Pool and others. Also learn about the heritage of those awesome 7 women that saved this in the 1970s and things like that of the area, and as well as to connect, just one of the best. So what we like to say is that the preserve is not just for the birds. It's for all of us, it belongs to all of us, and it will be for generations to come. With that, I'm done. And I'm happy to answer questions. Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. One is there any work in progress to expand the preserved land and also to open it up to areas to cover?
Great question. So I'm going to do the expansion first. We're not looking to purchase a whole bunch more land. We've fulfilled the acreage requirement of our permit. What we do now is to try to do for configurable purpose. So if there's a small tract of land next to a really big one and we could get a piece that'll connect those two together, connectivity, we would pursue that. But we're not actively trying to grow the preserve anymore. And then we also have, it's in that huge stack of paperwork that was in that one picture, but there's certain macro sites that we have to have certain acreage in. So the Jollyville Plateau site that we consider that's kind of like that 620, 27, 69 has to be a certain amount of acreage. And our Lake Travis site has to be a certain. So there might be additives there to kind of grow those sites. As far as public access goes, The places that are public access of the BCP were public access when the preserve was created. So places like the Barton Creek Greenbelt, Emma Long Park, Hamilton Pool, places like that. Other than the visitor center that we're building, there's not a big push to open those areas other than guided hikes that we do through our volunteer program, and my team in the city of Austin does an amazing hike program, and we have a hike program. But it's a difference between a preserve system that's to benefit people and for recreation, park system to benefit people and recreation, and a preserve system whose main goal is there for the protection of that species and the wildlife. So not a huge push to open a lot of that to the public other than our guided hike programs and volunteer programs and the visitor center. Yeah. Sir?
You showed all the different organizations that are responsible
Yeah.
for the preserve. Nine of them. Do they all work individually? Do they get together? How does that all work?
Yeah, it's super convoluted as bureaucracy would be, right? I would say they kind of all work independently under the same goal. I mean, even like the city of Austin and Travis County, we work closely on a lot of things. Some of our projects, like the Double J&T and the Medway project, where the berms and swells, they literally share a fence line, but we still have to keep everything separate because they're different government organizations, and sharing funding between those is like a big deal, right? And so they all kind of act independently, even though they're part of the same group. And some of these, yeah, so.
The reason I asked was I could see conflicts occurring where one group is wanting to head one way and one wants to do it slightly different.
Sure. And that's why the framework of the plan kind of outlines all of that stuff. And like LCRA is one of the big players, and they have the land specifically to mitigate for their infrastructure projects, right? And so that's why we manage a lot of that because they don't have land management people, they don't have biologists, that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
What's the relationship between BCP and the National Wildlife Refuge?
Other than name, not much, right? And so they were formed at the same time for the same purpose, but they're completely run by federal government, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We don't have a play in that at all. We're just kind of there for the same thing, and unfortunately, very similar names. We're often confused with one another. But same goal, but completely separate organizations. Yeah.
Is that what's out by Marble Falls?
Yeah, that's 1431 out by Marble Falls, way north, even in Williamson County. Yep. Yes, sir.
What's the relationship between Fish and Wildlife and the BCP program? I mean, because they're all interested in maintaining the endangered species. And so do you guys have a reporting requirement somehow to Fish and Wildlife?
We do. We have yearly reports that are submitted to them to talk about everything that we do on the preserve, how it's managed, down to the acreage and everything. It's all given to them on a yearly basis, and we have to do that to maintain that permit. It's been a long time, so a lot of the personnel has changed over, and with any relationship comes those high points and low points and different things, right? But that's with anytime you're working with any big government organizations. But overall, they were trying to figure all this out really when the BCP was created, and now it's kind of served as this model. So,
What's the main requirement that they have for you other than maintaining what you have? Do they have any other things that they've been throwing in to say, oh, by the way, we want you to do this, if it goes outside the BCCP?
no, the real thing was you have to get this land X amount and protect these certain caves. And then once you have them, you have to manage them actively for the species. You can't just, preserve system like this, you can't just lock it up and walk away from it, right? And so it requires so much active management. Yeah. But you just do the plan, you do you. Yeah. So, anything else? Yeah.
So some landowners are getting conservation easements
Mm-hmm.
for a tax adjustment. And so those lands are in forever, right? Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
So do they consult with BCP? Is there any interaction between those?
So part of our plan, we do conservation easements on the BCP, then it basically folds that land into the BCP program. It's not used in the mitigation part of it, but we do have a whole conservation easement program that people can come into and basically add their lands to the BCP system.
So, for example, this tract on Bunny Run,
Uh-huh.
Woods, are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was just wondering how all these different entities, Hill Country Conservancy, and
Yeah, similar goals, but we don't always work together with one another. You know what I mean?
and the Nature Conservancy, so.
And they're one of the, yeah, the Nature Conservancy is one of our partners, and that big orange tract that's on the map there is part of the BCP. But it's completely closed to the public but they have like scout campouts and things like that. It's pretty cool.
Jeremy, oh, go ahead.
Josh.
I was just on that note, so do the biologists of the BCP work for all the different agencies too, or do they have their own?
No, we typically, like the Travis County biologists work on the Travis County tracks, those purple tracks. City of Austin has a whole biological team. The Nature Conservancy has biologists. Travis Audubon has a whole manager that manages just their preserve systems and things. Oh yeah, we share data all the time. I mean, our biologists were out with the city banding on their property the other day, and they'll come up and band on ours. We all share information and share resources as freely as possible, but we're just doing it as those independent groups.
Certainly with the visitor center, this kind of impacts that, but rather than public access, I would ask about what you see the future of public awareness is. I know, Gary and I, for example, we're high guides on the Boston Wildlands and guide here too.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the more awareness you have, I mean, I didn't know it was out there until I started this master naturalist.
Right. Right.
And it's fantastic. But we see a lot of the same cases.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the same club. It's great. It's wonderful. But how do we get more awareness?
It's the visitor center, because that's going to be our way to get school groups in there to allow, those big busloads of kids that so many of our nature centers we can't facilitate a busload of 300 or several busloads of kids just because we're small and you can't. So that's going to be our foray into doing that large group format and really boosting that and building up the docent guided hike program like they have here and like they have in other places. I mean, you guys are our voice. You guys are the way to get that out there, because I can post to social media and do all those things, but it's kind of that word of mouth voice that really drives it home. So y'all are the ones that we lean on for that kind of stuff. Yeah.
For us, but it's just need more folks out there. I mean, I've been on hikes where there were three guides and three non-guides.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of a bunch of folks.
Yeah.
The full complement. But it's often almost everybody's always a master naturalist.
Yep.
It's people who are kind of in the know, and trying to get it out there to people who are not in the know. I think if I had a goal myself, if I could tap into something, that would be a goal.
And that's part of my goal, my volunteer coordinator and Paul's goal, like every day, is how do we get new people that don't know about this in here and do it? And it's basically just that word of mouth and that, you don't know who, you might say, hey, come see this one day, and it leads to them bringing their whole church group or whatever, or, school group. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've noticed that there's some corporations getting involved on that they want to give back to the environment. I was thinking of Deloitte,
Mm-hmm.
Whole Foods, and maybe Dell.
Yep.
Quite a few.
And, I'm a bad volunteer manager here, because I didn't even talk about our volunteer program during all of this, right? But we have a big, robust volunteer program, and a lot of that is corporate groups. If you work for a corporation that would like to come out for a guided hike work day, we do those. And we've had Deloitte out just recently, and we've worked with Target. We were contacted by Tesla. We've done stuff for Apple. We kind of do all the groups in the area. But anything from those, but again, our things that we do now, we can't, Tesla, they were like, yeah, we want to bring out like 200 or 300 people on a day. I was like, sorry, I can't help you, right? But maybe one day, we'll be able to do that at the visitor center. But yeah. Jada?
So out at the reserve,
Yep.
Balcones Canyonlands Preserve,
Yep.
Refuge, they have friends of Balcones that they regulate all the hikes, they train hike leaders, and it's a great program. Is there anything equivalent to that for the BCP? And if not, would it be something that the BCP could use?
We've talked about it before, and actually at some point somebody tried to start a friends group with the BCP, and it was rejected. And the reason being is because we're fully funded, right? We have money coming in. We have those tax dollars from the sale and the permit, money that comes in from the mitigation. And so we've thought about doing that, and it may come to it one day where we might do something that just benefits the outreach and education program or something like that, and not necessarily go to like buying land, right? But so far, it's just kind of my group and Kate's group at the City of Austin, the Austin Water Wildlands Volunteer Group, and Wild Basin and West Cave. We all have these volunteer groups that kind of go to the same pot, right? So, yes, sir.
Of the organizations and entities that you listed, you didn't list the state of Texas. I'm curious, what role does the state of Texas have in this? Because I can't imagine it doesn't want to be here in things that are going on in Travis County.
Other than some grants from Texas Parks and Wildlife to buy places like Wild Basin way back in the 70s, they're not at the table. Yeah. I don't know the full history of all of the, those things, but we got some federal grant money. Austin passed a couple of bonds, but to my recollection, there hasn't been a lot of state involvement in it. Sure.
I was just going to make a comment about how close it was back in the 90s, from my perspective. Wild Basin, there are roads through here that are now growing over. The Gold Chihuahua reciting up in the Forest Ridge, Bull Creek Park area. There are roads through there that are obviously grown over and people put water bars in to keep the erosion out. There are fire hydrants up there. There are sewer lines up there that were never used. It was that close that that land would now be completely homes.
Absolutely.
Until it was bought. And it's an amazing thing that happened back in the 90s. I mean, from the bond election to everything, to buy that land, essentially just, people talk about, the old adage of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, this was literally victory from the jaws of defeat.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to walk on those roads and think, wow, there's a culvert here, there's this, but there are golden cheap waters.
Yeah.
Just outside here.
That is awesome.
And I know I've been outside with Chuck Sexton, and we call it the Warbler Wars. I love that term.
Yeah.
Days of the Warbler Wars.
Yep, the days of the Warbler Wars. Yeah. But yeah, it is incredible. It is cool. Yeah, for real.
Keep on, the visitor centers are wonderful.
We're so excited about that. I think it's going to be really cool.
You're not building a new building, you're making a
We're just retrofitting the building and making it cool. But I mean, it's going to be really neat. Like you walk into the building, and it's a 3-story tall open atrium there, and we have a picture that I should have put in here, but it's like you walk in and it looks like a cave with like a giant ash juniper growing out of it, and you'll be able to go underneath and look at all the karsty things, and then you'll be able to go upstairs and see what's living in the tree, and then go up above the canopy and see all the birds and the things, right? So it's going to be super cool. Yeah. What's that? We're estimating 4 years. We're looking at 4 years. Yep.
And how about the trails that are adjacent or behind the building? Are they
Yep.
open now?
There's a full 90, no, nothing's open right now. I do guided hikes there occasionally. That was one of the trails that was hit really hard by the winter storms. And since the visitor center construction was going on, we decided not to work on those trails a whole lot because we know we're going to have a professional group come in and really shore up those trails. So they're kind of not in the state right now to be on. Yeah.
I was going to make one comment about that building, because last year I was doing bird collision count.
Yep.
And the thing that struck me, other than hardly any dead birds, which I guess is good, there was nothing. Because the whole place has been landscaped, was at that time being landscaped. There were rat traps down there. And so it
Yep.
was like a corporate head office.
Yep.
And it basically, everything was being killed off, except nice grass.
Yep. And all the invasive plants that are in the front beds and all those things. We're ripping all that out and we're going back to native. We can't wait. So, yeah. Go ahead.
So, I've heard you talk about the ash juniper before.
Yeah.
How are you going to get it in there?
Oh, it's going to be completely fake. It's going to be built. It's going to be all, made by there's a whole companies that do exhibit design and building. No, it's going to be a faux. I would love to have a real ash juniper in there, but that's above my level of green thumb. But yeah, no, it's all going to be kind of like you would see when you go to a museum, right? No real birds. There's not going to be any real birds. It'll all be exhibits and displays and local artists and cool stuff like that. So, yeah. So any other questions, or do you guys want to go have another drink? Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. It was a good job.